It is the product of months and months of work by the conference committee members, members of both parties, members of both houses. Now, there's been a very interesting discussion that's been going on with respect to this subject matter. One of my colleagues suggested that we should just take the action that the governor proposed at the beginning of the year and exercise no legislative thought, but just support it, because the governor, after all, was elected statewide. And that, I think, misunderstands the separation of powers in our great system. And any member is free to give up their right to individual analysis, to say that they just want to be part of the herd, and to go wherever the governor says. So if you follow that logic, you should also support this bill, because this bill represents the evolution of the governor's thinking as well. So if you want to just check in your own individual analysis and go with the governor's great thinking, support this bill. Now, if you think the legislature has a role in evaluating proposals, in refining ideas, in uncovering new solutions, you should also support this. And we just heard from the minority leader about an issue that was raised. Not a loophole, but an area where there was lack of specificity. Why? Because there were multiple clauses within the same bill that addressed the same subject matter, and then there was a question about the application of one specific ruling. And so, for absolute clarity, my seatmate has introduced a bill, AB 197, that has worked its way through the process in the Senate to make sure that there is absolute clarity in this area. Clarity that didn't exist in the governor's initial proposal. Again, raising the value of legislative involvement in this process. Now, why is that bill not before us? That bill is not before us because it's gone through a legislative and deliberative process in the Senate. It has now been finalized and is awaiting a vote that will happen as soon as the minority party in the Senate breaks from its caucus. The Republican policy staff in this House have a copy of the bill, permission to demonstrate the bill.
Without objection.
Have a copy of the bill, are working on the analysis for all of the members of this House to look at, from both parties, so that you don't just get the language, but you get the benefit of the analysis of your staff in looking at the issues raised. Now, I was frustrated by some who really went outside of the expectations of decorum in this body as they began to impugn the character and the motivations of members as they're moving forward in this area. So I want to just speak to that for a second. There are some who said that this is some great favor to unions. Well, I think if you check with the unions who are opposed to this, they'd give you a very different perspective. Mr. Adler from the NPR tweeted about his conversation with one of the labor leaders who's been involved in this discussion. And to clean up his tweet, he said something to the effect of, any doubt about how unions feel about pension legislation? SEIU's Terry Brennan said he's, I'll soften it and say ticked off, at least 5 times in my 6-minute interview. Another large public employee union basically put folks on notice that they were going to inform their membership both here and in each of our respective districts about the actions that we take. It was a rather pointed commentary. And it was pointed because they don't like what we're doing. Other members in their debate have said that this is problematic for local government and that it should be opposed because of the positions of local governments and the limitations that the legislation imposes on local government. Permission to read directly from a few documents.
Without objection.
League of Cities put out a statement calling this, quote, historic legislation, expressing their support. CSAC, the California State Association of Counties, again expresses that this is meaningful and lasting pension reform. Meaningful and lasting pension reform. They go on to say that AB 340 ends the worst abuses in the pension system and allows the counties as employers greater flexibility to negotiate cost-sharing agreements. When you're dealing with an issue as complicated as pension reform, when you're dealing with a variety of systems that operate at the same time, that cover different sets of workers, there are no one-size-fits-all approaches. This legislation was built from the ideas promulgated by the governor at the beginning of the year and benefit from the interaction of the conferees and are quite frankly informed by the discussion of many members, conferees and not conferees, majority party members and, believe it or not, minority party members. And it is never the expectation that anybody will like every element of a piece of legislation, especially one as complicated as this. How many of us have introduced a bill that is near and dear to our heart and worked our way through the legislative process and figured out refinements that would get the support, only to find something that we didn't love quite as much as our initial idea, but we understood it was significant and meaningful and we wanted to move forward? That's the reality of this pension reform. It is meaningful, significant, historic reform that saves us, as the chair of the conference committee says, between $50 and $70 billion in the out years. It creates greater accountability. It asks for employees to shoulder a larger burden of funding their pensions. It asks for people to work longer before they retire, because that's consistent with what we know about life expectancy. It makes sure that we're all in it together. And it does two important things. It makes sure that our pensions are affordable to we, the public, in the long run, but are also dependent and dependable for the workers who toil away in public service for 20 or 30 years. There were selected quotes from selected lines and selected publications. One was from the Contra Costa Times. Let's look at the headline of one of the Contra Costa Times articles discussing this. They say, "Fix the loophole and pass the reform." Today, we will do both. As soon as the Senate takes up AB 197, we will bring it over. As it clears our desk, it'll be the very next item that we act upon. We will now move forward on a vote on this measure as soon as Mr. Furutani closes. And the only responsible act, I think, is for us to look past any individual little tweak we'd like to see here or there and see the bigger picture. And I think my colleague from Santa Clara Valley really summed it up correctly when he said that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is an opportunity to make meaningful, historic pension reform in the interest of the people of the state of California, and I ask for your aye vote.